The ambassador from the Vraxian collective slammed 3 of his 6 limbs against the council chamber floor, his translator implant screaming profanities that made the atmospheric processors hum with interference. Across the circular arena, the Keltheran representative had already drawn her ceremonial blade, pointing it at the Zephyrite delegation while her mandibles clicked in rage. The emergency beacon above the Grand Arbiter's platform flashed red for the 3rd time in an hour. Nobody was listening anymore. Commander Jake Morrison watched the chaos unfold from his position in the observation deck, arms crossed, face expressionless. Beside him, Lieutenant Amy Chen shifted uncomfortably as another fight broke out near the eastern sector of the council floor. The Draconid envoy had just tackled a Forbian minister, and security drones were struggling to separate them. "Sir, shouldn't we do something?" Amy asked. Jake didn't move. "Our orders are to observe and report, nothing more." "But they're asking for our input. The Grand Arbiter has called for Earth's position 17 times now. I'm aware." Below them, the Grand Arbiter, a floating crystalline entity that had mediated galactic disputes for 3,000 years, pulsed with desperate orange light. Its voice echoed through the chamber, amplified by technology that predated most civilizations present. "Earth delegation, please. Your silence serves no one. The Outer Rim Territory's dispute requires immediate resolution." Jake watched as a Vraxian delegate threw a data tablet at a Keltheran. The tablet exploded against a force field, showering sparks across the floor. "Sir, this is getting bad," Amy said. "The entire council is falling apart." "Not our problem. The Grand Arbiter is literally begging us to participate." Jake finally turned to look at her. "Lieutenant, do you remember what happened the last time humanity offered to mediate a dispute?" Amy's face tightened. "The Calvor incident." "The Calvor incident," Jake repeated. "We proposed a simple trade agreement. Equal distribution of resources, fair taxation, standard diplomatic procedure. And what happened? They accused us of trying to establish human supremacy. 17 species signed a joint declaration calling us manipulative warmongers. The Vraxians started a propaganda campaign saying we were planning to colonize the entire sector. The Keltherans tried to quarantine our home system. Jake turned back to the chaos below. All because we suggested maybe everyone should get an equal vote. Another explosion rocked the council chamber. This time it was an actual weapon discharge. Security drones swarmed the area, but 2 delegates were already injured. The Grand Arbiter's voice took on a tone that might have been panic if crystalline entities could panic. "Earth delegation, we acknowledge past misunderstandings. But this situation is critical. The Vraxian Collective and the Keltheran Unity are on the brink of war. Millions of lives are at stake. Your species has unique perspectives on conflict resolution." Jake activated his communicator. "This is Commander Morrison to Grand Arbiter. Earth's position remains unchanged. We are here as observers only. But Commander, your expertise is not wanted. You made that clear 18 months ago when you voted to exclude humanity from the Security Directorate. You made it clear when you implemented trade restrictions on human colonies. You made it clear when you allowed the Outer Rim Coalition to establish military outposts within 5 light years of our borders without consultation." The Grand Arbiter flickered. "Those were decisions made under different circumstances. Those were decisions made last year. On the council floor, the Vraxian ambassador had now physically attacked the Zephyrite delegation. The beautiful winged beings scattered, their crystalline voices creating a harmonic scream of distress. The Draconids had formed a battle line, their reptilian features twisted in aggression. The Keltheran Unity was chanting something that sounded like a war hymn. Amy watched in horror as the Grand Arbiter tried desperately to restore order. Force fields activated throughout the chamber, separating the various species, but it only seemed to make them angrier. They began throwing things over the barriers, hurling insults, broadcasting threats. "Sir, we have the capability to stop this," Amy said quietly. "Do we?" Jake asked. "Because the last time we tried to help, they told us to stay in our corner of the galaxy and stop pretending we understood interstellar politics. They said humans were too young, too naive, too violent to contribute meaningfully to galactic governance. That was propaganda from the Vraxians. It was signed by 43 species, Lieutenant, including the ones currently trying to murder each other down there. Jake gestured at the chaos. They didn't want our help then. They don't get it now. The Grand Arbiter made one more attempt. Commander Morrison, I am formally requesting Earth's intervention under Article 7 of the Galactic Cooperation Treaty. The same treaty that you amended to exclude human representatives from leadership positions? That Article 7? Silence. Then, yes, request denied. Amy grabbed his arm. Sir, with all due respect, people are going to die. People are always going to die, Lieutenant. The question is whether they die learning a lesson or die for nothing. Jake watched as another fight erupted. For 200 years, humanity has tried to participate in this council. We've offered solutions, compromises, technological advances. We've shared our history, our mistakes, our hard-won wisdom about conflict and cooperation. And for 200 years, we've been told to sit down and shut up. Delegates were fighting in zero gravity, weapons were being drawn despite regulations, and the security systems were failing under the strain. The Grand Arbiter was flashing distress signals in every color of the spectrum. Jake activated his communicator again. Morrison to Earth Command. Situation at Galactic Council has deteriorated beyond recovery, requesting permission to evacuate human personnel. The response came immediately. Permission granted, Commander. Bring everyone home. Amy stared at him. We're just leaving? We're just leaving, but, sir, Lieutenant, sometimes the best way to teach someone the value of your presence is through your absence. Jake headed toward the exit. They'll figure it out. Or they won't. Either way, it's not our problem anymore. Behind them, the Galactic Council descended further into chaos, and humanity walked away without looking back. The evacuation of human personnel from the Galactic Council headquarters took 47 minutes. Jake Morrison supervised the operation with the same calm efficiency he brought to everything, watching as diplomats, technicians, and military liaisons filed through the transport bay. Nobody questioned the order. Everyone had been expecting it for months. Dr. Lisa Grant, the chief human xenobiologist assigned to the council, stopped beside Jake as she waited for her transport. She was carrying 2 bags and had what looked like a potted plant from her office tucked under one arm. Did you see what's happening in the Eastern Wing? She asked. The Faribians and Draconids? They've completely sealed it off. Nobody goes in or out. I heard weapons fire. Jake nodded, but said nothing. Lisa shifted the plant to her other arm. You know, I spent 12 years studying Keltheran culture. I wrote 3 papers on their conflict resolution traditions. Beautiful stuff, really. They have this whole philosophical framework about harmony and balance, and now they're throwing furniture at each other. Yeah, she smiled sadly. Funny how philosophy disappears when resources are on the line. The transport bay doors opened, revealing the sleek Earth vessel waiting beyond. The ship was called the Meridian, a mid-sized diplomatic cruiser that looked almost boring compared to the elaborate alien ships docked nearby. Human vessels had always been practical rather than beautiful. Do you think we're doing the right thing? Lisa asked. Just leaving them? Jake watched another group of humans file past, their faces showing various degrees of relief and concern. Doctor, how many times did you present your research on Keltheran conflict resolution to this council? 4 times. And how many times did they implement any of your suggestions? Lisa was quiet for a moment. None. How many times did they tell you that human understanding of xenopsychology was fundamentally flawed because we hadn't evolved in a proper social collective? Every time. Then yes, Jake said. We're doing the right thing. Amy Chen appeared from the corridor, tablet in hand. Sir, final head count complete. All human personnel accounted for. We're ready to depart. What about the station's shared facilities? The research labs? I authorized emergency data transfers. Everything important is backed up on our systems. The rest, Amy shrugged, they can keep. Jake activated his communicator one final time. Morrison to Grand Arbiter. This is official notification that Earth is withdrawing all personnel from Galactic Council facilities. Our embassy will be closed indefinitely. All diplomatic channels through this council are hereby suspended." The Grand Arbiter's response was immediate and desperate. "Commander, please reconsider. We can address your concerns. We can establish a committee to review human integration into council proceedings. You've had 200 years to address our concerns. You formed 17 committees. None of them changed anything. This time will be different." "No, it won't." Jake looked out at the chaos visible through the viewport. Fires were burning in 3 different sections of the council chamber. "You know what the problem is, Arbiter? You never actually wanted our input. You wanted our validation. You wanted humans to sit quietly in the corner and nod approvingly while you maintained the same power structures that have been in place for 3 millennia. That is not accurate. Name one human proposal that was adopted by this council in the last 50 years. Silence stretched across the channel. Finally, the Grand Arbiter said, "The Henderson Protocol for Deep Space Communication, which you implemented only after the Vraxians independently developed the same technology and you needed to decide whose version to use. You picked ours because it was slightly cheaper, not because you valued human innovation." Jake gestured for Amy to begin final departure procedures. "We're done being your backup option. Commander, you must understand the political complexities." "I understand perfectly. The Vraxian Collective controls 40% of the Council's military resources. The Keltheron Unity manages most of the major trade routes. The Zephyrites have the oldest continuously functioning government in known space. And humans? We're the newcomers, the upstarts, the ones who had the audacity to develop faster-than-light travel independently instead of waiting to be discovered." Through the viewport, Jake could see Vraxian warships beginning to move into position around the station. The Keltharans were doing the same from the opposite side. The situation was escalating from political chaos to potential military conflict. "You see that?" Jake pointed at the ships. "That's about to become your problem, not ours. Earth forces could prevent this confrontation. Your defensive technology is superior to both sides." "You're right. We could shut down every weapon system on those ships without firing a shot. We've had that capability for 30 years. Did you know that?" The Grand Arbiter flickered with surprise. "No, of course you didn't, because when we tried to share that technology, you accused us of attempting to establish a surveillance state. You said human technology was inherently aggressive and incompatible with peaceful coexistence." Jake started walking toward the transport. "So here's what's going to happen. We're going to leave. Those ships are going to fight. And you're going to realize that maybe, just maybe, you should have listened when we were trying to help. This is blackmail. No, this is consequence. Blackmail would be us demanding concessions in exchange for our assistance. We're not demanding anything. We're just going home." Lisa Grant was already aboard the transport securing her plant. Other humans were strapping into their seats, looking relieved to be leaving. Amy stood at the entrance waiting for Jake. The Grand Arbiter tried one more time. "Commander, I am authorized to offer Earth a permanent seat on the Security Directorate, full voting rights. Immediate implementation." Jake stopped walking. For a moment, he considered it. Then he thought about every insult, every dismissal, every time human diplomats had been told they were too young to understand, too violent to contribute, too different to be trusted. "You know what's funny about that offer?" he said. 6 months ago, that's all we wanted. A seat at the table, a voice in decisions that affect our species. We would have been grateful. Then accept it now. Can't, because now I understand something about you, Arbiter, about this whole council. You don't offer power when you respect someone. You offer it when you're desperate, and I'm not interested in building a relationship based on your desperation. You would let billions die for pride? I would let billions learn that actions have consequences. You spent 2 centuries treating humanity like children. Now you can solve your own problems like adults." Jake boarded the transport. Amy sealed the door behind them. Through the thick windows, they could see the Council station growing smaller as the Meridian pulled away. Behind them, Vraxian and Kelpheran warships were moving into attack positions. Inside the ship, the mood was strange. There was relief at leaving the toxic political environment, but also anxiety about what came next. Jake made his way to the bridge, where Captain Ben Foster was overseeing the departure. "Smooth exit, Commander," Ben said. "No one tried to stop us. They're too busy trying to kill each other. I've got sensors tracking the situation. The Vraxians have armed their heavy plasma cannons. The Kelpherans are charging their void weapons. This is going to get ugly." Jake settled into the observer's chair. "How long until we're clear of the engagement zone?" 15 minutes at current speed. "Take us to the edge of the system and hold position there." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Holding position? Not heading straight home?" "I want to see how this plays out." Amy moved to stand beside him. "Sir, if you're planning to intervene—" "I'm not, but Earth Command will want a full report, and I intend to give them one, complete with detailed sensor readings of what happens when the Galactic Council's carefully maintained peace falls apart." The Meridian reached the edge of the engagement zone just as the first shots were fired. The sensors showed it clearly. A Vraxian destroyer launching 3 plasma torpedoes at a Kelpheran cruiser. The Kelpherans responded with a void pulse that temporarily disabled 2 Vraxian ships. Then everyone started shooting. "It's a full battle," Ben said, his voice tight. 12 ships engaged. Correction, 18 ships. More are jumping in. Jake watched the tactical display. The fight was chaotic, uncoordinated. Both sides were furious, but neither had a clear strategy. Ships were firing at anything that moved, hitting their own allies as often as their enemies. "They're not even communicating with each other anymore," Amy observed. "Look at the comm channels." Complete breakdown. The Grand Arbiter's voice suddenly filled the bridge, transmitted on an emergency frequency. "All ships, cease fire." "This is a direct order from Galactic Council Authority. Cease fire immediately." "Nobody stop shooting. Earth vessel Meridian." The Arbiter's voice shifted, now directed at them. "Commander Morrison, you have medical facilities. There are casualties. Civilian transports are caught in the crossfire." Jake looked at the tactical display. The Arbiter wasn't lying. 3 civilian ships were trapped between the fighting forces, taking collateral damage. One appeared to be a passenger liner. "Ben, can we reach those civilian ships?" Jake asked. "Easily. We'd have to enter the engagement zone, but our shields can handle the stray fire." "Do it. Extract the civilians, provide medical support if needed." "But, Ben," Jake's voice hardened, "we don't touch the military vessels. We don't disable weapons. We don't interfere with the battle itself." "Clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." The Meridian moved back toward the battle, its shields glowing as it absorbed hits meant for other targets. The human ship was faster and more maneuverable than anything else in the area. It reached the first civilian transport in minutes. "It's a Zephyrite passenger ship," Amy reported. "Heavy damage to life support. They're requesting immediate evacuation." "Grant them docking permission. Get everyone off that ship." Over the next hour, the Meridian performed 3 separate rescue operations, pulling hundreds of civilians from disabled transports while the battle raged around them. The human ship moved through the combat zone like a ghost, untouchable, focused solely on saving lives while ignoring the military vessels entirely. The Grand Arbiter watched this and understood the message. Humanity would save innocents. They would provide medical care. They would perform rescues, but they would not stop the powerful from destroying each other. By the time the Meridian finished its rescue operations, the battle had reached a stalemate. Both sides had taken heavy casualties. The Vraxians had lost 4 ships, the Kelpherans had lost 3, dozens more were damaged. And still, neither side would back down. Jake looked at the readings and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Set course for Earth. Maximum speed. As the Meridian left the system, the last thing its sensors recorded was the Grand Arbiter's platform going dark, its power reserves exhausted from trying to maintain order. The ancient mediator that had kept peace for 3,000 years had finally failed, and humanity hadn't spoken a single word in its defense. The journey back to Earth took 6 days through the faster-than-light corridors. Jake spent most of that time writing his report and taking care of the rescued civilians. The Meridian had pulled 417 beings from the battle zone, representing 9 different species. None of them were Vraxian or Keltheran. Everyone caught in the crossfire had been innocent bystanders. Dr. Lisa Grant set up a temporary medical bay in the ship's cargo hold. She moved between patients with practice deficiency, treating burns, radiation exposure, and psychological trauma. Most of the survivors were in shock, unable to process what they'd witnessed. A young Zephyrite named Kira approached Jake on the 3rd day. Her crystalline wings were cracked and one arm was in a stabilization field, but she was walking. Commander Morrison? Her voice had the characteristic harmonic quality of her species. I wanted to thank you for saving my life. You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. Kira's multifaceted eyes reflected the corridor lights. The council ships just kept fighting. The Vraxians almost hit us twice. They knew we were there. They just didn't care. Jake didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Is it true that Earth is leaving the Galactic Council? Kira asked. It's true. Because of how they treated your people? Because we're tired of being blamed for problems we didn't create and excluded from solutions we could provide. Kira was quiet for a moment, her wings flickering with bioluminescent patterns that Jake had learned meant she was thinking hard. My world, the Zephyrite Collective, we've been council members for 800 years, and in all that time, I don't think we ever actually influenced a major decision. We vote, we attend meetings, we follow protocols, but the real power? That's the Vraxians, the Keltherans, the old civilizations. Then why stay? Because we thought it was better than being alone. Kira looked at him directly. But maybe we were wrong. Maybe being alone is better than being ignored. Jake thought about that long after Kira had returned to the medical bay. The idea that the council wasn't just failing humanity, but failing most of its members hadn't fully occurred to him. He'd been so focused on Earth's exclusion that he'd missed the broader pattern. He found Amy in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars streaming past in faster-than-light distortion. She'd been quiet since they'd left the battle zone. Penny for your thoughts, Lieutenant? He asked. Just wondering if we did the right thing, she said without turning around. We saved the civilians, but we let the military ships destroy each other. Would you have preferred we intervened? I don't know. Maybe. She finally looked at him. What if the Vraxians and Keltherans keep fighting? What if this turns into a full-scale war? Then it will be a war they chose. Not one we could have prevented. You don't know that, don't I? Jake moved to stand beside her. Amy, how many conflicts has the Galactic Council mediated in the last century? I'd have to check the records. I already did. 347. You know how many involved the major powers like the Vraxians or Keltherans? How many? 0. Every single mediation was between smaller species, colonies, minor disputes. Whenever the powerful members had a disagreement, the council found a way to give them what they wanted. They'd force smaller species to compromise, to give up resources, to accept unfavorable terms, all to keep the major powers happy. Amy's expression shifted. I never thought about it that way. Nobody does. The system works great if you're on top. But for everyone else, it's just organized exploitation dressed up as diplomacy. Jake gestured at the medical bay below. Those people we rescued? They weren't caught in the crossfire by accident. They were there because the council sent them on trade missions into disputed territory knowing it was dangerous, because keeping commerce flowing was more important than their safety. The ship's intercom crackled. Commander Morrison to the bridge. We're receiving a tight beam transmission from Earth Command. Jake and Amy made their way forward. Captain Ben Foster had already routed the transmission to the main screen. The face that appeared was Admiral Susan Hayes, commander of Earth's combined fleet and one of the most respected military leaders in human space. Commander Morrison, she said without preamble, I've read your preliminary report. I need you to confirm something. Did the Galactic Council really refuse to implement any defensive protocols while their chamber descended into violence? Confirmed, Admiral. The Grand Arbiter attempted to activate force fields and security measures, but most delegates had already disabled them in their sectors. They wanted to fight one human personnel without casualties? Correct. 417 civilians of various species were also rescued. Admiral Hayes leaned back in her chair. The Council is already spinning this story. They're claiming humanity abandoned them in a time of crisis, that we violated treaty obligations by refusing to mediate. Jake felt his jaw tighten. They're claiming we violated treaty obligations? It gets better. The Vraxian Collective has formally accused Earth of conspiracy to destabilize the Council. They're saying we secretly encouraged the Keltharan Unity to make aggressive demands, knowing it would lead to conflict. It's also being taken seriously by at least 20 Council species. The narrative is already out there. Dangerous humans, too violent to be trusted, using chaos to advance their own interests. The Admiral's expression was grim. They're trying to make us the villains of their story. Amy spoke up. Admiral, with respect, anyone who is there knows that's not true. The Council collapsed on its own. I know that, Lieutenant. Commander Morrison knows that. But the truth doesn't matter if enough people believe the lie. Admiral Hayes pulled up a data file. I'm sending you updated orders. When you reach Earth, you'll report directly to the Security Council. They want a full briefing on everything you witnessed. Understood, Admiral. And, Commander? Off the record? Between you and me? Hayes smiled slightly. I'm proud of you. Walking away took more courage than staying would have. The transmission ended. Jake stood in silence, processing the information. After 200 years of trying to participate in galactic politics, Earth was being blamed for its collapse. Ben spoke from the captain's chair. Sir, if the Council is really pushing that narrative, we could be looking at serious consequences, trade sanctions, closed borders, maybe even military posturing. Let them posture, Jake said. We spent 2 centuries proving ourselves to species that refuse to see our value. I'm not interested in proving ourselves anymore. What if they try to enforce penalties, economic blockades? Then they'll learn that Earth is more self-sufficient than they realized. Jake pulled up his own data files. Do you know how much of our economy depends on Council trade? No, sir. 11%. And most of that is luxury goods, not essentials. We don't need them nearly as much as they've convinced themselves we do. The Meridian continued toward Earth. In the cargo hold, Dr. Chi Grant was having similar conversations with the rescued civilians. Many were worried about returning to their home worlds, afraid of what the Council's collapse might mean for smaller species. A Forbian merchant named Quinn approached her while she was checking his radiation exposure levels. Foribians were amphibious beings covered in bioluminescent scales that changed color with their emotions. Quinn's scales were showing patterns of anxiety. Dr. Grant, is it true that humans have ships faster than anything the Vraxians or Keltharans possess? Lisa chose her words carefully. Human vessels use different technology. I'm not qualified to make military comparisons. But you rescued us from the middle of a battle. You moved through weapons fire like it wasn't even there. Our shields are effective, yes. Quinn's scales shifted to a pattern Lisa had learned indicated hope. Could Earth protect smaller species if the Council falls apart completely, if the major powers start claiming territory? That's not a decision I can make, Quinn. I'm a xenobiologist, not a politician. But could you? Technologically, I mean. Lisa thought about the question. Earth's military capabilities were substantial, though the Council had never fully grasped their extent. Humans had developed defensive technology that could disable weapons without destroying ships, shield systems that could protect entire planets, and faster-than-light travel that left other species far behind. Theoretically, she said carefully, Earth has certain capabilities that might be useful in a defensive context. Then why haven't you shared them with the Council? We tried. Multiple times. We were told our technology was too aggressive, too militaristic, incompatible with Council philosophy. Lisa finished her scan and put down her equipment. The truth is, the Council never wanted what humanity could offer. They wanted us to be junior members following established rules, not bringing in disruptive innovations. Quinn's scales flickered through several colors before settling on something like determination. When we reach my world, I'm going to tell my people what really happened, not the Council's version. The truth. That might make you unpopular with certain factions. I don't care. I'm tired of pretending the Council works when it clearly doesn't. Similar conversations were happening throughout the ship. The civilians who had been rescued were questioning everything they'd believed about the Galactic Council, about the power structures they'd taken for granted, about whether the system really served anyone except those already at the top. On the 5th day of the journey, the Meridian sensors detected something unusual. 3 ships were following them, maintaining a consistent distance but not attempting to close or communicate. Ben brought the readings to Jake. They're trying to be subtle about it, but they're definitely tailing us. 2 are Vraxian scout ships, the 3rd is Keltherin. Are they working together? Doesn't look like it. The Vraxian ships are on one vector, the Keltherin on another. They might not even know the other is there. Jake studied the sensor data. What's their weapon status? Armed but not charging. They're just watching. Keep monitoring. If either group makes a hostile move, we respond with full defensive measures, but don't engage unless they fire first. The ships followed the Meridian all the way to the edge of Earth's home system. Then, as if crossing an invisible line, they both turned back simultaneously. They'd wanted to see where humanity was going, wanted to know if Earth was really withdrawing or planning something else. Jake watched them disappear from sensors and felt a grim satisfaction. They're scared, he realized. They spent 2 centuries dismissing humanity as primitive newcomers, and now they're scared of what we might do. Earth appeared on the view screen 2 hours later. The blue-green planet looked peaceful from space, completely unaware of the political chaos unfolding in the wider galaxy. The Meridian was directed to the orbital station above North America, where Earth Command maintained its primary headquarters. As they approached the station, Amy came to stand beside Jake one final time. "Sir, when we brief the Security Council, what do you think they'll decide?" "I think they'll do exactly what we did," Jake said. "They'll look at 200 years of being dismissed and excluded, and they'll decide it's not worth trying anymore." "And if the Galactic Council actually falls apart completely," Jake smiled, "then the galaxy will learn to solve its own problems. Or it won't. Either way, humanity will be fine." The Meridian docked without incident. As Jake prepared to disembark, he took one last look at the tactical reports from the Council system. The fighting had stopped, but only because both sides had exhausted their immediate military resources. The Vraxians and Keltherins had retreated to their respective territories, neither willing to admit defeat, neither capable of continuing. The Galactic Council headquarters sat empty, its ancient halls silent for the first time in 3,000 years. The Grand Arbiter had gone into dormancy, its crystalline structure dark and inactive, and across the galaxy hundreds of species were asking themselves the same question: what happens now? Jake Morrison had no answer for them. But he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, humanity would face it on their own terms, not as supplicants begging for acceptance, but as equals who had simply stopped pretending otherwise. The briefing room at Earth Command was deliberately austere. No decorations, no windows, just a long table and 12 chairs. Jake sat at one end, Amy Chen beside him, facing the Security Council that governed Earth's interactions with the wider galaxy. Admiral Susan Hayes sat at the opposite end. To her right was Minister of Foreign Affairs Daniel Brooks, a career diplomat who'd spent 30 years navigating council politics. To her left was Director Catherine Wells of the Strategic Intelligence Division, responsible for monitoring threats to Earth's interests. The other seats were filled with representatives from the major continental governments, military commanders, and scientific advisors. "Commander Morrison," Minister Brooks began, "your report makes for disturbing reading. The Galactic Council, an institution that has maintained interstellar peace for 3 millennia, collapsed into violence within hours. And humanity chose to simply walk away." With respect, Minister, we didn't cause that collapse. We chose not to prevent it. Some might argue that's a distinction without a difference. Jake leaned forward. Minister, how many times in the last decade has Earth proposed reforms to council procedures? 47 separate proposals ranging from minor procedural changes to fundamental restructuring. How many were adopted? None passed the initial committee stage, Brooks admitted, because the committee stage is designed to kill proposals that threaten existing power structures. We weren't just being ignored, Minister. We were being actively blocked. Director Wells spoke up, her voice analytical and cold. Our intelligence suggests the Vraxian Collective is preparing to classify Earth as a hostile power. They're approaching smaller species with a narrative that we deliberately destabilized the Council to advance human interests. Let them, Jake said flatly. We have the recordings. Anyone who wants the truth can see exactly what happened. The truth doesn't matter if no one believes it. Then they can live with their comfortable lies. I'm done trying to convince people who've already made up their minds. Admiral Hayes raised a hand, silencing the debate. Commander, let's focus on practical matters. What's your assessment of the current military situation? Are we looking at potential hostilities? Jake activated a holographic display above the table. Based on sensor data from our exit, the Vraxian Collective and Keltheron Unity are both severely weakened. They lost significant military assets in their confrontation. Neither has the capacity for a sustained campaign against Earth right now. Right now being the operative phrase, Wells noted. Correct? Given time to rebuild, either or both could pose a threat. However, there's a complicating factor. Jake manipulated the display showing ship movements across multiple sectors. 17 smaller species have withdrawn their representatives from Council headquarters. They're not declaring independence from the Council system, but they're clearly reassessing their relationships. Minister Brooks studied the data. That's more than I expected. The civilians we rescued are talking. They're telling their governments that the major powers didn't just fight, they endangered innocent lives without hesitation. That's changing perspectives. How does that help us? It doesn't, directly. But it means the Vraxians and Keltherans have bigger problems than Earth right now. They're trying to hold together a political coalition that's fragmenting. Admiral Hayes pulled up additional files. I've been reviewing our military readiness. The Meridian is one of 73 vessels in our diplomatic fleet. Our actual combat fleet numbers 212 ships. We have defensive platforms around Earth, Mars, the outer colonies, and 3 deep space monitoring stations. That's a fraction of what the Vraxians can field, one of the military commanders observed. In raw numbers, yes, but our technology is more advanced in key areas. Hayes brought up comparative analysis. Our shields are faster than light systems, our sensor arrays, all superior to current Council standard. The only reason the other species don't know that is because we've never had to use them in combat. We've avoided combat intentionally, Jake added. Every time the Council tried to draw us into military operations, we found diplomatic alternatives. They interpreted that as weakness. Was it? Minister Brooks asked. No. It was us being careful not to reveal our full capabilities until we needed them. Jake stood and walked to the holographic display. Madam Minister, members of the Council, I need you to understand something. The Galactic Council wasn't just politically dysfunctional. It was strategically incompetent. They've been fighting the same territorial disputes for centuries because no one will implement lasting solutions. They prefer maintaining the status quo, even when it's clearly failing. And you believe Earth can do better? I believe Earth can choose not to participate in their dysfunction. Whether we can do better is a question for different circumstances. Director Wells tapped her datapad. I'm more concerned about immediate threats. Commander, you mentioned that Vraxian and Keltheran ships followed you to the edge of our system. That suggests reconnaissance, possibly preparation for future action. Agreed. But they turned back at the boundary. They were testing our response, seeing if we'd act aggressively. And we didn't, which might be interpreted as weakness. Jake smiled grimly. Or it might be interpreted as restraint. Let them wonder which. The meeting continued for 3 more hours. They discussed trade implications, diplomatic strategies, military preparedness, and possible scenarios ranging from complete council collapse to reformation under new leadership. By the end, no clear consensus had emerged except for one point: Earth would not be rejoining the Galactic Council anytime soon. Minister Brooks summarized the decision. "We'll maintain our embassy facilities but keep them minimally staffed. We'll honor existing trade agreements but negotiate no new ones through council channels. We'll monitor the situation and respond to direct threats, but we will not volunteer to mediate disputes or offer assistance to the council as an institution." "What about individual species?" Amy Chen asked. "Some of the smaller ones might seek bilateral relationships with Earth." "We'll consider those on a case-by-case basis," Brooks said, "but we'll be very careful about appearing to undermine the council structure even if that structure is failing."
After the meeting, Jake and Amy were walking through the command center when they encountered Dr.
Lisa Grant. She'd been giving her own briefing to the medical and scientific divisions. "How did it go?" Jake asked. "Complicated," Lisa said. "The xenobiology department wants to maintain research relationships with other species, but they're concerned about political blowback. Science doesn't exist in a vacuum. Nothing does. I've been thinking about what you said on the ship, about how the council was exploiting smaller species." Lisa pulled up her datapad. "I went through historical records of council mediations. You were right. In 78% of disputes involving a major power and a minor one, the minor power was forced to make concessions. The pattern is undeniable once you look for it. Did you share that analysis?" "With my department head. He told me to keep it quiet, not let it influence our scientific relationships." Lisa's frustration was evident. "Even now, even after everything, there's this impulse to not rock the boat." "That's going to take time to change," Amy said. 200 years of being trained to defer to the council's authority doesn't disappear overnight." They were interrupted by an alarm. A priority message was coming through on the diplomatic channels. Jake rushed back to the briefing room where Admiral Hayes was already reading the transmission. "It's from the Grand Arbiter," she said. "The entity has come back online. It's requesting immediate talks with Earth representatives." "Requesting or demanding?" Jake asked. Hayes read further. "Requesting. Very politely, actually. It wants to discuss mutual concerns arising from recent unfortunate events." Unfortunate events. That's how they're characterizing a battle that killed thousands and left their headquarters in ruins? Apparently. Hayes looked at the council members. "The question is, do we respond?" Minister Brooks was cautious. "If we ignore them completely, we risk appearing petty or vindictive. And if we respond too eagerly, we appear desperate for their approval," Director Wells countered. Jake thought for a moment. "Admiral, what if we respond but not through me? Send someone who wasn't involved in the evacuation. Someone who can listen to what they have to say without the emotional baggage." "You have someone in mind?" "Dr. Grant, actually. She's a scientist, not a military officer or politician. She can approach this from a neutral perspective." Hayes considered this. "Dr. Grant, how do you feel about representing Earth in preliminary talks with the Grand Arbiter?" Lisa looked surprised. "I'm not a diplomat." "You're a xenobiologist who studies how different species think and communicate. The Grand Arbiter is an ancient crystalline intelligence that's been mediating conflicts for 3,000 years. Maybe what this situation needs isn't diplomacy. Maybe it needs understanding." Lisa thought about it. "If I do this, I'm going in with no authority to make commitments. I can listen, I can report back, but I can't negotiate." "That's perfect," Brooks said. "It gives us information without binding us to anything." "Then I'll do it." The meeting with the Grand Arbiter was scheduled for 3 days later, giving Lisa time to prepare. She spent those days reviewing everything known about the entity, its history, and its role in galactic politics. The more she read, the more complex the picture became. The Grand Arbiter wasn't a person or even a traditional artificial intelligence. It was a collective consciousness formed from the remnants of an ancient civilization that had achieved technological transcendence before most current species had left their home planets. It had volunteered to serve as a neutral mediator because, lacking physical form or personal interests, it could theoretically remain objective. but 3,000 years was a long time to maintain objectivity. Lisa traveled to the meeting location on a small, fast ship called the Pathway. It was just her and a minimal crew, no military escort, no diplomatic entourage. The message was clear. Earth was willing to talk, but not to be impressed by ceremony. The meeting took place at a neutral station in unclaimed space. When Lisa arrived, she found the Grand Arbiter waiting in a chamber that seemed to exist in more dimensions than her eyes could process. The crystalline entity floated in the center, pulsing with soft light. "Dr. Grant!" Its voice resonated through the space, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "Thank you for the invitation, Grand Arbiter. I asked to speak with you specifically because you are a scientist. I believe you can understand what I am about to say in ways that politicians and military commanders cannot." Lisa settled into the seat provided, which adjusted itself to her biology. "I'm listening." "I have failed," the Grand Arbiter said simply. "For 3,000 years I have mediated disputes, maintained peace, and preserved the Galactic Council as an institution. And in doing so, I have allowed that institution to become corrupt." This wasn't what Lisa had expected. Corrupt how? By prioritizing stability over justice, by allowing powerful species to dominate weaker ones in the name of maintaining order, by treating newer civilizations like humanity as problems to be managed rather than perspectives to be valued. The entity's light dimmed. I told myself I was being pragmatic. The Vraxians control substantial military resources. The Keltherans manage critical trade routes. If I challenged them too directly, they might leave the council, and the resulting chaos would harm everyone. So you compromised. I compromised again and again and again. And now I have a council that cannot function when its most powerful members disagree, because they've been allowed to operate above the rules for so long that they don't remember how to follow them. Lisa leaned forward. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because humanity tried to warn us. Over and over, your representatives pointed out structural flaws, proposed reforms, suggested alternatives, and we dismissed you. Not because your ideas were wrong, but because implementing them would have required challenging the powerful, and I lacked the courage to do that." The Grand Arbiter's light pulsed in what might have been shame. "I watched Commander Morrison evacuate his people. I watched him save civilian lives while refusing to intervene in the military conflict. And I understood what he was doing. He was demonstrating what the Council should have been all along, willing to help the helpless, unwilling to enable the powerful. That's a generous interpretation of his motivations. Is it wrong?" Lisa thought about Jake Morrison, about the cold anger in his eyes as he'd watched the Council tear itself apart. No, it's not wrong, but it's also not the whole story. Commander Morrison was angry, hurt. He felt betrayed by an institution that Earth had tried in good faith to join. I know, and that's why I asked to speak with you, not him. I don't need humanity to forgive the Council. I need humanity to understand that some of us recognize what went wrong. What do you want from Earth, Grand Arbiter? Nothing. Or rather, I want nothing that I have any right to ask for. I simply wanted you to know that the Council's failure was my failure. The Vraxians will blame humanity for destabilizing the system. The Keltherans will claim they were provoked. Dozens of other species will create narratives that absolve them of responsibility. But I will not. I failed to maintain the integrity of the institution I was created to protect. Lisa sat in silence, processing this. The Grand Arbiter, ancient and immensely powerful, was confessing its mistakes to a human scientist. There had to be a reason beyond simple honesty. "You're planning something," she said. "I am reforming the Council, not repairing it, reforming it. The old structure is beyond salvage. I'm creating something new, something that doesn't allow any single species or group to dominate others." "And you want Earth's input on this new structure?" "I want Earth to observe, to witness, and perhaps, if humanity chooses, to participate. But I'm not asking you to rejoin under the old terms. Those terms were unjust." Lisa pulled out her datapad. "Grand Arbiter, I need to be clear about something. I have no authority to negotiate or make commitments. I'm here to listen and report back. I understand. I'm not asking for commitments. I'm simply asking you to tell your people that change is coming. Real change, not superficial reforms designed to preserve the status quo. What kind of change? The Grand Arbiter's light intensified. The Vraxian Collective and Keltheran Unity will be removed from their positions of special influence. All species will have equal representation and equal voting power. Decisions will be made by true consensus, not by coercion, and species that refuse to accept these terms will be free to leave the Council entirely. That's going to cause another crisis, undoubtedly. But it's a necessary crisis. The Council has been built on foundations of inequality and exploitation for too long. If it cannot be reformed, then it deserves to collapse. Lisa made notes, her mind racing. The powerful species won't accept this without a fight. They don't have to accept it. They simply have to choose whether they want to be part of a reformed council or separate themselves entirely. Some will leave. That's inevitable. But others will stay because they recognize that the old system was failing everyone, including them. And where does humanity fit in all this? Wherever you choose, you can participate in the Reformed Council as equals. You can establish bilateral relationships with individual species. You can maintain distance and focus on your own development. The choice is yours, with no penalties regardless of what you decide. Lisa studied the Grand Arbiter carefully. You know that trust, once broken, is very difficult to rebuild. I do. I'm not asking for Earth's trust. I'm asking for Earth's patience while we prove that we can change. If we fail, you've lost nothing. If we succeed, then perhaps someday in the future, humanity might choose to give the Council another chance. The meeting lasted another hour. Lisa asked detailed questions about the proposed reforms, the timeline for implementation, and how the Grand Arbiter planned to handle resistance from the major powers. The entity answered everything with striking honesty, acknowledging uncertainties and potential failures. When Lisa returned to Earth, she went directly to Admiral Hayes with her report. The Admiral listened carefully, then called an emergency session of the Security Council. The Grand Arbiter is either genuinely committed to reform or executing the most elaborate manipulation in galactic history, Lisa concluded. I can't determine which with certainty, but my instinct says it's the former. Minister Brooks was skeptical. Your instinct based on what? Based on 3,000 years of studying how species communicate across cultural barriers, the Grand Arbiter was exhibiting genuine shame, genuine regret. Those aren't emotions that artificial intelligences fake well. What about the practical aspects? Admiral Hayes asked. Can it actually implement these reforms? That's the real question. The entity has significant authority within the council structure, but not absolute power. If enough major species refuse to cooperate, the reforms will fail. Director Wells brought up galactic political maps. Based on our intelligence, approximately 40% of council species are likely to support fundamental reforms. Another 30% could go either way depending on incentives. The remaining 30%, including the Vraxians and Keltherans, will almost certainly oppose. So we're looking at a potential split, Brooks observed. We're looking at the end of the Galactic Council as a unified institution, Wells corrected. What emerges afterward could be multiple smaller coalitions, each with different governance structures and priorities. Jake Morrison had been listening quietly. Now he spoke up. That might not be a bad thing. The Council tried to govern too many species with too many different needs under one rigid system. Maybe having multiple smaller groups would be more functional. Or it could lead to increased conflict as those groups compete for resources and influence, Brooks countered. Potentially, but competition isn't automatically bad if it's conducted within reasonable boundaries, and frankly, the alternative is trying to hold together a system that's already proven itself dysfunctional. Admiral Hayes considered the options. Here's what I'm proposing. We acknowledge the Grand Arbiter's communication. We express willingness to observe the reform process without committing to participation. We maintain our current stance of limited engagement but leave the door open for future cooperation if the reforms prove genuine. A wait-and-see approach, Brooks said. Exactly. We don't help them fix their problems, but we don't actively obstruct them either. We focus on our own interests while monitoring how the situation develops. The Council voted on Admiral Hayes' proposal. It passed unanimously. Earth would watch, wait, and reserve judgment. Over the following months, the Grand Arbiter's reforms began to take shape. True to its word, the entity stripped special privileges from the Vraxian Collective and Keltheran Unity. Both species immediately withdrew from the Council in protest, taking several allied species with them. But they also took their conflict with them, continuing their territorial disputes away from the Council structure. Smaller species began participating more actively in Council proceedings. Proposals that would have been blocked under the old system were debated seriously. Not all of them passed, but the conversation itself was different, more inclusive, more democratic. Some species approached Earth directly, seeking bilateral trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Earth negotiated these carefully, establishing relationships based on mutual respect rather than Council-mandated protocols. And slowly, very slowly, human perspectives on the Galactic Council began to shift, not from hostility to trust, but from active rejection to cautious observation. Maybe the system could be fixed, maybe it couldn't. But either way, humanity would decide its level of engagement based on evidence, not promises. Jake Morrison watched these developments from his new position as advisor to the Security Council. He felt no satisfaction in being right about the Council's dysfunction, only a quiet hope that maybe, eventually, galactic civilization could build something better. But he never forgot the lesson learned in those chaotic hours when the Council collapsed. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from a broken system and refuse to help maintain its dysfunction, not out of spite, but out of respect for yourself and a belief that everyone deserves better. The galaxy would learn to figure things out, or it wouldn't. Either way, humanity would be fine. 12 months after the evacuation, Earth received an unexpected visitor. A small diplomatic vessel emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system, broadcasting peaceful intentions and requesting permission to approach. The ship was registered to the Zephyrite Collective. When it docked at the orbital station, Ambassador Kira emerged, her crystalline wings fully healed from the battle damage she'd sustained a year earlier. She was accompanied by a delegation representing 17 smaller species, all of whom had withdrawn from the traditional council structure. Jake Morrison met them in the diplomatic reception area, surprised but maintaining his professional composure. Ambassador Kira, I wasn't expecting to see you again. Commander Morrison, or should I say Advisor Morrison now? Kira's wings flickered with patterns Jake had learned to interpret as determination mixed with nervousness. I've been authorized to speak on behalf of what we're calling the Association of Independent Worlds. We'd like to propose a formal diplomatic relationship with Earth. The Association of Independent Worlds? A Forbean stepped forward. It was Quinn, the merchant Lisa Grant had treated. His scales showed confident patterns now. 17 species who've decided the Galactic Council, even in its reformed state, doesn't serve our interests. We're establishing our own cooperative framework. Jake gestured for them to follow him to a conference room. This is unexpected. I thought the Grand Arbiter's reforms were addressing the concerns of smaller species. They're trying, Kira admitted, and the Grand Arbiter is sincere in wanting change. But the fundamental problem remains. The Council is too large, too unwieldy, and too weighted toward species with longer histories in space. We're not powerful enough to matter in that environment. They settled around a conference table. Jake activated recording systems and notified Admiral Hayes that she might want to observe this meeting. Quinn continued the explanation. We've spent the last year analyzing what makes successful interstellar cooperation work, and we kept coming back to the same conclusion. Scale matters. The Council tries to govern 437 species. That's too many for genuine consensus. So you're forming a smaller group, 17 species with similar economic development levels, similar political structures, and similar values regarding individual autonomy and collective decision-making, a third delegate added. This one was from a species Jake didn't recognize, bipedal with features that seemed almost insectoid. We can actually talk to each other and reach agreements because we're not trying to balance the interests of ancient civilizations against newcomers who barely have faster-than-light capability. Kira pulled up a holographic display. We've studied Earth's history extensively, particularly how your United Nations developed after your global conflicts. The concept of starting with voluntary cooperation on specific issues rather than trying to create one organization that governs everything, that resonated with us. Jake studied the display. What exactly are you proposing? Not membership in our association. We know you're not interested in joining another council-like structure, but we'd like to establish formal diplomatic and trade relationships with Earth on bilateral terms. And we'd like to propose something more ambitious, which is we want to create a mutual defense pact. Not an aggressive military alliance, but an agreement that if any of our worlds face external threats, we'll coordinate our defensive response. Jake sat back, considering the implications. This was significantly more than simple diplomatic recognition. That would require Earth to commit military resources to defending your worlds. And we would commit our resources to defending yours, Kira said. We're not asking for charity, Commander. We're proposing an alliance between equals. Quinn added, we're not powerful individually, but collectively our 17 worlds have substantial resources, strategic locations, and technologies that could complement Earth's capabilities. We've also been watching how other species view humanity after the Council collapse, with fear and uncertainty. The Vraxians are convinced you're planning some kind of expansionist campaign. The Keltherans think you're waiting for the right moment to impose human governance on everyone. Even species friendly to Earth are nervous because nobody understands your actual intentions. Our intention is to be left alone to develop on our own terms. We know that, but others don't. An alliance with the association would send a message. Earth is willing to work with other species, just not under the old exploitative frameworks. Jake activated his communicator. Admiral Hayes, are you following this? Every word, Commander. Bring them to Conference Room A. The Security Council needs to hear this proposal directly. The meeting that followed lasted 6 hours. The delegates from the Association of Independent Worlds presented detailed proposals covering trade agreements, technology sharing, cultural exchange, and the framework for a mutual defense pact. They were well-prepared, professional, and refreshingly honest about what they could offer and what they needed. Minister Brooks was cautious. This is essentially asking Earth to become the military anchor of your association. That's a significant responsibility. We're also offering Earth something you don't currently have, Kira countered. Political allies. Right now, you're isolated. Respected by some, feared by others, but not integrated into any cooperative structure. That isolation is a vulnerability. How so? Admiral Hayes asked. Because it makes you unpredictable. If the Vraxians or Keltherans decide to test Earth's defenses, they'll do it in a way that seems independent, not council-sanctioned. They'll probe your borders, test your response times, assess your capabilities. And without allies, you'll have to handle those provocations alone. Director Wells was already pulling up intelligence reports. We've detected increased Vraxian reconnaissance activity near our outer colonies. Nothing overtly hostile, but definitely surveillance. Exactly, Quinn said. They're trying to understand you, and they're doing it through military intelligence rather than diplomatic channels. An alliance with the association changes that calculus. Suddenly, any action against Earth or our worlds requires considering a much broader response. Lisa Grant, who'd been invited to the meeting as an observer, spoke up. From a xenobiological perspective, this makes sense. One of the patterns I've seen across species is that cooperative relationships based on mutual benefit are more stable than hierarchical ones based on power. The Council failed because it was fundamentally hierarchical. This proposal is fundamentally cooperative. The Security Council debated for another 3 hours after the association delegates were escorted to guest quarters. The arguments ranged across military strategy, economic implications, and long-term political consequences. Jake remained largely quiet, letting the politicians and military leaders work through the details. But finally, Admiral Hayes turned to him directly. "Advisor Morrison, you were there when the council collapsed. You made the decision to walk away. Now these species are asking us to walk towards something new. What's your assessment?" Jake thought carefully before answering. "A year ago, I was angry. Hurt. I wanted nothing to do with galactic politics because it felt like centuries of effort wasted on people who would never respect us. But I've had time to process that anger, and I still think walking away from the council was right. That system was broken, possibly beyond repair. But these species," he gestured toward where the delegates were housed, "they're not asking us to join their club and follow their rules. They're asking us to build something together as equals. That's fundamentally different. It's also risky," Brooks observed. "If we commit to defending their worlds and a major power decides to test that commitment, we could end up in exactly the kind of conflict we've been avoiding." True, but we could also end up isolated and vulnerable, dealing with that conflict anyway, but without allies. Director Wells pulled up strategic maps. From a pure military perspective, having friendly territory along our outer border creates a buffer zone. It also gives us forward positions for sensor arrays and defensive platforms without having to establish our own bases on contested territory. Admiral Hayes studied the maps for a long moment. "I'm inclined to move forward with negotiations. Not to accept their proposal as presented, but to develop something that serves both our interests and theirs." The council voted, not unanimously this time, but by a clear majority. Earth would negotiate with the Association of Independent Worlds toward establishing formal alliance relationships. Over the next 6 months, the details were hammered out. It wasn't easy. There were arguments about military command structures, economic integration, and what constituted a defensive versus offensive action. But both sides approached the negotiations in good faith, willing to compromise on details while maintaining their core principles. The final agreement was simpler than traditional treaties. Earth and the Association would maintain independent governments and military forces. They would coordinate on mutual defense, share intelligence about potential threats, and establish free trade zones. Neither side had authority over the other. Decisions about joint military action required unanimous consent from all parties. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The signing ceremony took place on Earth, in Geneva, at the same building where the United Nations had been founded centuries earlier. Jake stood in the observation gallery watching as Admiral Hayes, representing Earth, and Ambassador Kira, representing the Association, affixed their signatures to the digital document. Amy Chen stood beside him. "This feels significant. It is significant. This is Earth choosing to engage with galactic civilization again, just on our own terms. Do you think it'll work?" "I think it has a better chance than the Council ever did, because it's built on voluntary cooperation instead of forced unity." Jake watched as the delegates began celebrating below. The Council tried to make hundreds of species fit into one system. "We're acknowledging that different groups need different structures." Lisa Grant joined them, carrying a glass of something sparkling. "The Xenobiology Department is thrilled. This opens up research partnerships with species we've barely been able to study before. Just don't let them convince you to rejoin the main council," Jake said with a slight smile. "Not a chance. The Grand Arbiter asked me about that, actually." "What did you tell it?" "That Earth is exactly where it needs to be. Building new relationships based on mutual respect rather than trying to fix old ones based on exploitation." Lisa raised her glass. "To new beginnings." They clinked glasses and watched the celebration below. Outside the windows, Earth turned peacefully in space, unaware that it had just taken its first step toward becoming not just a member of galactic civilization, but a shaper of how that civilization evolved. The Vraxian Collective watched these developments with growing alarm. Their intelligence services had been monitoring Earth closely since the Council collapse, trying to understand human capabilities and intentions. The alliance with the Association of Independent Worlds complicated their assessment significantly. In the Vraxian High Command, military leaders debated their options. Some argued for immediate action, establishing dominance before Earth became too powerful. Others counseled patience, waiting to see if the alliance would collapse under its own contradictions. The Kelthoran Unity had similar debates. They'd spent centuries as one of the Council's dominant powers. Now they found themselves in a rapidly changing political landscape where old assumptions no longer applied. But Earth and the Association weren't focused on the major powers. They were too busy building something new. Trade routes opened. Cultural exchanges began. Human engineers worked alongside Zephyrite scientists. Forbian merchants established trade partnerships with Earth colonies, and slowly, a network of cooperation emerged that existed entirely outside the traditional council structure. The Grand Arbiter observed all of this with what might have been satisfaction if crystalline entities could feel such emotions. Its reforms were proceeding slowly and painfully, but proceeding nonetheless. And now there was an alternative model. A demonstration that interstellar cooperation could work differently. Some species began approaching both the Reformed Council and the Association, asking if they could participate in multiple frameworks simultaneously. The answer from both was yes. Why not? The whole point was voluntary cooperation, not exclusive membership. 18 months after the alliance was formed, Jake Morrison received a message from an unexpected source. The Vraxian Collective wanted to establish a formal dialogue with Earth. Not through the Council, not through intermediaries. Direct, bilateral talks. He brought the message to the Security Council with some amusement. They spent 2 centuries telling us we were too primitive for galactic politics. Now they want to talk. Do we respond? Brooks asked. I think we have to, Admiral Hayes said. Ignoring them would be petty. And we need to understand their intentions. What if this is some kind of trap? They could be trying to isolate us from the Association. Jake shook his head. They're not stupid enough to think that would work. More likely, they're realizing that the galaxy is changing and they need to adapt or become irrelevant. Earth agreed to talks. They took place on a neutral station, with Jake leading the human delegation and a Vraxian military commander named Thex leading theirs. Thex was an impressive being, covered in chitinous armor that gleamed under the station's lights. His species had dominated galactic military affairs for 5 centuries. Now he sat across from a human advisor and looked decidedly uncomfortable. Commander Morrison, Thex began, his translator rendering his clicking speech into clear English, the Vraxian Collective acknowledges that our previous interactions with humanity were suboptimal. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. We were wrong to dismiss Earth's contributions to the Council. We were wrong to support your exclusion from positions of authority. We were wrong to treat your species as inferior. Jake waited. There had to be more. We would like to propose establishing a formal relationship between the Vraxian Collective and Earth, not through the Council structure, but through direct bilateral agreement. Similar to what we have with the Association of Independent Worlds, we were thinking something more extensive: military cooperation, technology sharing, joint development of strategic resources. Jake leaned back. Commander Thex, why now? Why not during the 200 years when we were actively seeking partnerships? Thex's mandibles clicked in what might have been embarrassment. Because we believed we didn't need you. The Vraxian Collective has been powerful for so long that we forgot how to recognize potential allies. We saw Earth as competition to be managed, not as partners who could make us stronger. And what changed your mind? The Association. Watching 17 species successfully coordinate despite having less military power than the Vraxians, less economic influence than the Kelthorans, and less history than most council members. They're doing it through genuine cooperation, and it's working. Meanwhile, our traditional allies are questioning their relationships with us because we offer only power, not partnership. Jake pulled up a data pad. I'm authorized to explore this conversation, Commander Thex, but I need you to understand something. Earth isn't interested in being a junior partner in Vraxian operations. If we establish a relationship, it needs to be between equals. We understand. Do you? Because everything about Vraxian culture that I've studied suggests your species organizes itself hierarchically. You have clear power structures, clear chains of command. The concept of partnership between equals isn't natural to you. Thex was quiet for a moment. You're correct. It's not natural to us, but we're capable of learning. And the current galactic situation is teaching us very clearly that our old approaches are failing. The talks continued for days. Jake reported back to Earth regularly, and gradually a framework emerged. Not an alliance like the one with the Association, but a careful agreement to cooperate on specific issues where interests aligned. It was limited, conditional, and could be terminated by either party at any time. But it was a start. Similar conversations began happening across the galaxy. The Keltheron Unity approached the Association about trade agreements. Medium-sized species started forming their own cooperative frameworks. The Reformed Council, now much smaller and more focused, worked on becoming genuinely democratic rather than maintaining the illusion of democracy while real power resided elsewhere. The galaxy was reorganizing itself into multiple overlapping networks of cooperation, each with different structures and priorities. It was messier than the old unified council, more complex, harder to navigate, but it was also more resilient, more adaptable, and more honest about what it was. Jake watched these developments from Earth, no longer angry, no longer hurt, just curious about what came next. 5 years after humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, Jake Morrison retired from his advisory position. He'd done what he set out to do, ensure that Earth engaged with galactic civilization on its own terms rather than someone else's. What came next was for others to decide. On his last day, he stood in the same observation lounge where he'd watched the Council collapse 5 years earlier. Amy Chen, now a commander herself, joined him. "Any regrets?" she asked. "About walking away?" "No. About what it took to get here, maybe." "You changed the galaxy, sir." Jake smiled. "The galaxy changed itself. We just stopped pretending it could stay the same forever." Below them, Earth turned peacefully in space. Above them, the stars held millions of possibilities. And somewhere out there, countless species were learning the same lesson humanity had learned through painful experience. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop participating in systems that don't value you. Not because you're giving up, but because you understand that real change requires being willing to walk away from what's broken and build something better. The Galactic Council had descended into chaos. Humanity wouldn't even talk. And somehow, in that refusal, they'd started a conversation